Welcome to the Success Talk Show, the podcast for ambitious leaders who want to get their best results and create a workplace for their teams to thrive. Each week, we share practical advice to help you accelerate your success and grow as an inspiring leader. Now, here's your host, Leadership Success Coach, Donna Ceriani.
So welcome to another episode of the Success Talk Show for Ambitious Leaders. And I'm really excited about our guest today to welcome Susan Chritton. Susan is the author of Personal Branding for Dummies, one of my favorites. And Susan is my go-to expert for personal branding. She's an executive career coach and a master personal branding strategist. Now, how I know Susan is that she was my instructor when I wanted to learn about personal branding. So, of course, she's the person I look to be the expert on this subject. Her career development work led her to personal branding, and that's where she draws on her ability to identify each individual's uniqueness and then arrange the variables in his or her life to help them map out a strategic plan. So let's get started. Susan, welcome.
Thanks, Donna.
One of the questions I hear most often is I find that many people struggle with the concept of even having a personal brand and how it can actually help them in their career. So can you share with us, why is having a strong personal brand important?
I think, Donna, nowadays, as we're doing so much social media and we are so much more visible than we ever have been, that to me, what a personal brand does is says, this is a strategic choice. This is about how much you want to take control of how you're seen and start to influence the messaging and the image of you out there. And I think what's happened is that a lot of people almost turned it over to somebody else. Like, oh, my boss defines who I am, or the people around me define who I am. And they certainly are a big impact on your personal brand because it's how you're seen in the hearts and minds of others. But a big part of your personal brand is how do you strategically take control so that you can actually influence that so you can be seen the way you want to be seen. And I think it's so important now especially with social media and all the different ways that we're seen out there, that you actually really pay attention to it and see, how you are influencing other people's view of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important. And so, Susan, where you've worked with people for such a long time on their personal brands, what's the biggest mistake you see people make when it comes to their brand?
Well, and I see this all the time, is that people jump right in and they think their personal brand is how they look on LinkedIn or how they look on Facebook. And so they often just jump in and say, oh, I need to put this on LinkedIn and fill this out. And actually, what they really need to do is stop and think and plan and really be strategic about how do they want to be seen? What are the images that send a message? What are the words that send a message? And matter of fact, just last week, I got a call from someone who, through a friend, said, oh, Susan knows how to put together LinkedIn profiles. And usually, and this is what I told her, is I do that as part of our work together, the whole body of work. And she said, no, I just want you to do my LinkedIn. And what I said is I go, oh, so your audience is so-and-so. And she said, no, that's not it at all. And I said, well, that's how I read what you've got here. And she said, are you telling me that I need to change my message? And I said, I am, because you're presenting yourself completely differently. So back to your question of, what are the biggest mistakes, is I see people all the time not really thinking about the words they use, if it's appropriate for the target audience that they're trying to serve, for how they want to be seen. They just almost like rush to go put things out there so it looks complete. It's really important to stop and really think about who you are, how you want to be seen, who the target audience is, who you're speaking to, and really be thoughtful in the way you take yourself out there. And so spending a lot of time up front doing that extra work.
Yeah, and Susan, something you said really resonated with me because recently when I'm speaking with people, to your point, so often they assume it's all about their LinkedIn profile. Mm-hmm. And they actually have difficulty imagining, there's a mental block there, imagining how do they actually need to show up every single day in all their interactions, giving presentations, how they work with people to solve problems, how they collaborate, how they even send emails, that they seem to think it's just all about that profile, but it's really so much more. It's about how they show up with really everyday activities.
Exactly. And people are very unaware of that. I mean, one of the biggest things they can do right away is just observe themselves. You know, how was that interaction? How did I show up today? In even how they send an email, how they have a discussion with someone. I was recently at an event and I was looking around and thinking, oh, did they really want to wear that here? Even
Why?
things
What was the situation?
It was a conference, and it was just some of the people showing up at the conference. It was actually a big conference in San Jose. It was the Watermark conference, and so it was a big women's conference. And most people look, very professional, but there was a wide range of ages of people. And, sometimes people are just not as aware of how they may show up, even in how they look with things, which is an important piece of your brand, too.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that, because I have found, when you said all generations, I have found that when I'm speaking with people who are younger and they say, I want to be an individual, show my fashion sense, I want to express myself with my creativity, but then they're asking at the same time, well, but how does this reflect my brand? How will this affect my ability to attract clients or get the promotion? And, it's a whole course in and of itself, but I see that sometimes, there's that choice to make of how do you want to be seen, and a happy balance with expressing your personality. And so I'm wondering what advice you have on that.
Well, I think that you need to always be thinking about, who am I trying to serve? It's not just about, let me express my individuality, because I'm all for that, really. Except that you also need to think about, and let me go back to my example of the woman who called me. This was not one of the better calls from a client that I'd gotten. I don't think we'll be working together, because she just didn't get it. She was speaking as if she wanted to work with executives. And I said, is that your target audience? And she said, no, I want to work with millennials. And I said, well, then you need to speak as if you're talking to them. And so whether you're speaking with words, whether you're speaking in images and in your clothing, you need to really think about, who is it that I want to serve, and how do they need to be spoken to or seen from that is going to appeal to them. And so it's not about being an individual or not. It's also, like, for many people in the workplace, how they dress and how they show up, their target audience might be their boss. It might be their coworkers. And how does that fit in with that as far as your individuality for that target audience you're trying to influence? So I think it's really important just to stop and think about, who are the people that I care about, that see me, that hear me.
That is, such good advice. And I'm just thinking about my own wardrobe choices, because I've never been a fashionista. But when I lived in Asia and I worked in financial services and technology, I was often wearing the navy blue suit, the black suit. I was, wearing the black suit with the white blouse and the pearls, because that's really what, if I'm going to be in Tokyo or Hong Kong, you had to look a certain way. I couldn't show up looking like a casual Friday in Boston or a casual Friday in New York. So you have to be aware of the environment that you're stepping into.
Or a casual Friday in San Francisco, which is even less.
Yeah, exactly. I remember years ago, and we were hiring a senior manager in Boston, and somebody showed up from California, and he was so casual. Now, everybody else showed up for an interview with the shirt, the tie, the business suit, and I think he showed up with a T-shirt, no socks, maybe wearing some boat shoes. And he looked like he just stepped right off of his yacht. I mean, he just looked wonderful, but it wasn't at all our environment. So it's just, it is something to pay attention to, because people, whether we like it or not, people do, either are drawn to us or not based on that first impression. So it is an important part of the brand.
And sometimes I do work down in Silicon Valley, and there was one of my clients, she says, Susan, you're just a little too dressed up for us. I said, okay, I got it. I'm okay being just a little too dressed up. I don't want to look way out of place. that was a choice. I said, I am a coach. It's okay if I look like I am a professional, but I do need to think about that place of dressing so I fit in their environment too, made them comfortable. I think here's where I think a big piece of personal branding is. It almost goes to a place of how I was raised, which was good manners are really about making other people feel comfortable. And I think a good personal brand is one where for the people, again, you're trying to serve, and for you being who you are, how do you find that nice mix of making them feel comfortable and you expressing who you are and it working? And to that point, not everybody's going to love your brand, and that's okay. As long as you are clear about who it is you're serving and working to do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because so even in addition, and I love what you're saying, Susan, because it really resonates with me, because even when I think about when I first started my business as a coach and doing consulting and so on, and if I was speaking with another technology company and the examples I would use, the examples of how I could help them, all were from my own background in technology. So it really resonated. And that was what made me unique of why they maybe chose me, was we spoke the same language. I manage customer support and all kinds of technology functions. Whereas somebody else could have been actually a better coach, but they didn't quite have that same fit and resonance with the client. So I do think that us tapping into what, where our specialty is, our sweet spot, or our expertise is, can really help in those situations. So it feels natural.
Exactly. And this is, again, just paying attention. Like I have a conference I'm working on in April, and it's to a group of hospitals. And I have done work in healthcare before. They actually want to really spend some time with me so I fully understand my target audience, so I can make sure my examples work, that I'm dressed in a way that they will relate to. And it's all on personal branding. So it is important that I make them feel comfortable, so then we communicate better. Right? So if I looked really odd and I was presenting a message they didn't really understand anyway, they wouldn't listen to me. So I think, there is that place in your personal brand of, again, really thinking about who it is you're speaking to and what your messaging is, and how do you make that work in a way that is still individual to who you are, which is what personal branding is all about. We're kind of off on the target audience, but right.
Yeah.
I think a big piece on this too, as you build your personal brand, is it's so important to spend a lot of time up front thinking about, what are my values? What are my beliefs? What are my strengths? What are my interests? And really taking yourself apart into these pieces and looking at these pieces and saying, all of these things put together make up who I am and how I go out in the world. And I actually had a client yesterday do this. It's the first time anybody's done this. I'd given her kind of the assignment of look at your values, look at your beliefs. And she ended up writing me this whole essay, which was fabulous, about how did what she believed in, how does that show up in her work in the business world? How does that belief translate into how she manages people or how she runs a project? And she said, I needed to go this deep to fully understand my own brand. And it was really brilliant. I loved it.
So Susan, that's a good segue to what was on my mind. I wanted to ask you is, it does sound like it does take some time to do the self-reflection, try and gain some clarity. And so how much time do you believe somebody really needs to spend sort of deliberately thinking about or taking action to manage their brand?
Well, I think everybody's got a different level of self-reflection. And so it's a hard question to answer specifically, because I think that people who have done a lot of self-reflection may not need to spend that much time because they've already done it. But I think they do need to spend the time pulling apart the elements of it to say, how does that translate to my message? When I work with a client, I would bet that kind of on average, I would say about 60% of our time working on a personal brand is really on that upfront part, that who are you? What are your strengths? What are your values? What are your beliefs? What do you need? And how does that, look in a personal brand? So now what does that message say? So I think that spending that time up front, people that want to skip it we always have to circle back to it because they start to get to the messaging and there's big gaps. Mm-hmm. So I don't think this is a quick process. I mean, you went through the class as well. It's one of those things that it may on paper look like it's not that hard to do, but when you start to dig in and really look at what does this mean for me, it can take several months to do that. And I often see people fully, like it being a 6-month process, and as far as so how much time do you spend on it? Maybe once you get it, I think that all depends, how active you are on social media, what your goals are. We didn't even talk about goals, but goals really point your personal brand in a direction. So depending on what your goals are for that, you might spend more or less time each day working on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know from our work together, it is time consuming up front to sit down and do the reflection. So it could be that, I know from my own appetite for, immersing myself in that reflection, it may be an hour or two, but then I have to let it sit and then wait a couple days or even a week so that I can digest it, sleep on it, let it sink in, then come back to it. So it isn't something that you could say, I'm going to clear the weekend and over Saturday and Sunday, I'm just going to push through and get it all done. Because it does take, it almost feels like you need to let it simmer or percolate for a little bit and come back to it repeatedly to see, are you really clear? Have you given this thought? It does seem very reasonable to say, 3 to 6 months, not because it's 3 to 6 months worth of work, but you need to give yourself time to make sure you are clear.
Well, and I also think that you almost go try it on. Like if you say, here's what I want my brand to be, and you go try it on, like I've often assigned somebody to go to a conference and practice their elevator pitch with different people and just try it on and see how it sounds. One of the exercises I like to do that I kind of speeds this process up a little bit is I like people to think about what's their one word. So what's the one word that you would use to describe yourself? And then I ask the question, how does that show up? Do people see that in you? Would anybody else use that word about you? Does it show up in the way you dress? Does it show up in the way you speak? Does it show up in your actions? And it's kind of a fun way to begin the process is thinking about your one word and then just observe yourself to see if that word shows up.
And so, Susan, I find that intriguing. I'm curious, what are examples of one words that you've heard?
So I've heard, and I do this in workshops often, like let's say somebody uses the word detailed. I'm organized. Okay. So my one word is organized. And I said, well, tell me how that shows up. Well, everybody in my department comes to me to kind of figure things out and set timelines. Or when I get there in the morning, I make my list for the day, and I make my list the night before, and I come in and I have everything ready to go on my desk for the day. Or even my clothes, everything is neat and organized on my body. Right? I button down collars. I have, whatever it might be. So, my hair's combed, whatever. So that would be an example of that. And then if people know each other, I may even have them comment on it. Would you use this word for so-and-so? And it's often an interesting thing. And then I ask them to go observe themselves. Do other people see this? Because sometimes somebody may think that they have a word for themselves and no one else sees it. Right? Like I would use a word for me as enthusiastic. And I think most people that know me would probably use some version of that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely. Yeah, that's an interesting, I've heard people say choose one word as your theme for the year. But I think taking it down to what's the one word to describe you, I love that. And so I know you've got lots and lots of other great tips. And, I will tell you, I think I mentioned to you, Susan, that your book, Personal Branding for Dummies, was a book that I've given away many times when I've spoken to groups on personal branding. I'll give your book away as a free gift because it's such a gem. It's a gem. I love it. And so I know you've got a wealth of tips and strategies and so on, but I'm curious, what are the top 3 tips you could share with us today? If somebody really wants to bring their brand to life, maybe even, there's a lot here, but what would be your top 3?
Well, I'm going to start with our one word. So just to begin with, as a top 3, think of your one word and then observe yourself and just notice how you show up. Does it show up in your writing? Does it show up in how you look in your daily interactions? And just begin to observe yourself. So the very first thing really I'd say to anybody as far as a top tip is just observe yourself. I think another piece is getting really clear about who you are and what you stand for. And back to that where that can take a while to really think about that, and the one word can start to tip that off, right? But get clear about who you are and what you stand for. Because if you do not have that clarity, it's really hard to build a brand. So I could say all kinds of things, which I do have other tips, but I think it's really an important piece to think about when you're authentic, which is a word that shows up a lot around personal branding, right? How do you be your authentic self? Well, you need to start to really think about what is that, right? If I were to say what's authentic, I mean, I'm enthusiastic, and sometimes I'm enthusiastic when I don't like something too, right? So I'm consistent on good things, bad things. And so I think thinking about that authentic, be clear about who you are and what you stand for. Here's another one that people often don't think about is that with social media can be really overwhelming. Matter of fact, I just got a blog post from somebody today about how do you handle social media anxiety, which, it can be that way for a lot of people. So one way to do that, and here's as far as a tip, is they could make a communication plan or some sort of plan that says every Friday I'm going to spend 30 minutes and that's when I'm going to update everything. And part 2 on the plan is I want to build my network in LinkedIn. So maybe I'll put that on the plan. And so every week I want to add 10 people. And so I would say a tip might be to actually plan your work and work your plan and make it so it's not overwhelming.
And I love what you're saying, Susan, about as part of the communication plan, thinking about how you can build your network, especially on LinkedIn, because I would say that when I have worked with clients, I'm going to say maybe 80 to 90% of the people I work with will feel badly that they haven't got a very big network. They've been so busy doing the job, getting the work done, getting results, really working hard, but really not paying much attention to the relationships that they've had through the years. So they feel a little funny reaching out to someone. And so I'm curious.
See that too. Yeah, I see that too.
And I always will say to them, well, listen, if you hadn't seen somebody for years and all of a sudden they sent you a message and said, hey, want to get together for coffee? How would you feel? And they go, oh, I'd love it. And I said, okay, well, then maybe that's how they're going to feel. But I'm curious, what advice do you have for people when they want to build their network on LinkedIn as it relates to their brand?
Okay. Another piece that I do is I became an applied positive psychology certified practitioner last year. So I've been trying to incorporate too a little bit more positive psychology with personal branding. And one of the things that actually increases people's positive emotions around things is making work as fun as a game. So how do you gamify a little bit of this? So you might say, okay, I'm going to shoot for 10 new contacts a week and make it your game. And who can I find from my college that I went to? Who can I find from my first workplace that I worked at? And maybe even turn it in a little bit into a game. And
I love
it's
that.
Not so tedious about, oh, I have to build my network and oh, I'm so embarrassed. No, make it fun.
I love that. I love that. I think anytime we can in fact, it's so funny because I hear that all the time. It doesn't matter how senior level the leader is. When you ask for feedback of what can we do to make this even better, it's always make it fun. Let's do more team challenges, games, fun. So I love that. Instead of having it feel like a burden.
Right. And so even things like, okay, here's one of my little gamifications that I did with my own LinkedIn is that I'm a really visual person and I love visual images. So I thought, well, LinkedIn offers me a way to put the banner across the top, right? So to put a banner in there. And so for me, I thought I'm going to change it every month just for fun.
I love that. I got to go take another look because I saw at one point you had, I don't know if it was colored pencils. I can't remember now. Well, so I love that. I've never heard anyone doing that. And I've gotten so many great ideas from you today, Susan. These are all fantastic.
Well, it does have a hearts theme this month.
Oh, okay. Of course. That makes a lot of sense. So these are, I know, I can't wait. I got to think about my one word, and I got to think of how I can make things more fun. These are all such great tips. So Susan, if anybody's listening and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
They could just email me at Susan Chritton, and it's CHRITTON.com. Also through my website. Or LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. So Susan Chritton on LinkedIn or Twitter. I have a sister-in-law named Sue, and with the same last name, and I got all the social media first, so it's...
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. You're always out in front. So, Susan, thank you so much for sharing these great tips. These are all tips that we can get started on today, so I love it. Thank you so much for your time today, Susan.
Oh, well, thank you, Donna. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.